So the question or the statement is, the best way to objectively assess mathematics knowledge and understanding is with pen and paper tests. So we're going to have an argument for, followed by an argument against. So, Norden, I'll call on your side to begin your first argument. I'll move out of Emma's way, shall I?
Okay. We believe that pen and paper tests is the best. Good afternoon, colleagues. We as the affirmative team firmly believe that pen and paper tests are the best way to go for assessing students' understanding and knowledge. Now, we define best as being the most accurate and the most efficient for the students and the teacher. Objectively, as the act of being fair and without bias, and pen and paper tests as the act of students being presented with a piece of paper and they have to physically write down their answers under a time constraint. Now, this is not saying that they cannot use technology to help them in the test. Our first argument, a test administered in class under time conditions is less stressful for students compared to alternatives. It can be completed during one period and there are clear requirements for the students. For example, our students now studying the new standard course are required to complete an assignment or an investigative task. And we believe that they are becoming more overwhelmed by these tasks than just sitting a test. So students are now required to use additional skills such as creating graphs, knowing how to insert mathematical symbols, and are shifting their focus towards formatting their assignment more than the actual work. Now this creates lost time. As Tim showed earlier, So as Stuart likes surveys so much, I actually did a survey with my classes who have previously done tests that are not pen and paper, and we had 34 out of the 45 students surveyed, which is more than 75%, actually state that they preferred the pen and paper test compared to more traditional or compared to the alternative assessment strategies. Furthermore, we believe that tests are as stressful as you make them. It is dependent on how it is presented to the students and what the teacher does with the results. So for example, our junior students sit pen and paper tests, but no mark is given to them, only the written feedback. This takes the focus of just a single number, and the students understand that our tests are simply a way of providing them with written feedback, and that it's just a way for us to know how they're progressing. So no pen and paper test, it creates more stress than less. Our second argument is that the pen is an essential thinking tool for a mathematician. Students spend so much time starting from preschool learning to write, so why should we take that away from them? More importantly, the creation and the manipulation of the mathematical symbols on the paper is a part of the learning process. The students have the opportunity to physically draw graphs and show all their working and their thinking processes. Regardless of whether the answer is correct or not, both the student and the teacher are able to retrace the steps that got them from A to B. It gives the teacher valuable... Sorry, the bell doesn't dismiss me.
That the class has stopped listening.
Thank you.
Miss Crosswell, two things. Number one, you taught my daughter in Year 8 last year and she was completely stressed out by your tests before, during and afterwards.
That's personal.
We're going to focus on two words, best and understanding. And firstly, we are going to say that tests do not assess understanding. What they do test is memorised and reproduced procedures, and that is not mathematics. I'm very glad that Mr. Wu brought up the chef analogy. If the New South Wales maths community was in charge of MasterChef, the TV show, this is what would happen. In the first half an hour, we'll watch people memorise recipes. And in the second half hour, they're going to cook them our way, our food, no choice, no voice, using a fire and a rock. is the New South Wales way. Test is not best. This is one of the 10 outcomes of the new standard syllabus. Read it carefully. Chooses and uses appropriate technology. And there's the equipment list. Which one of those will I use for fitting this exponential decay curve to that group of data I have been given? No way. Right. And then the one thing that is truly missing from that list is the encyclopedic videographic memory of everything your teacher said and did in year 11 and 12. This is not mathematics. It is a movie. Right. Classic example, a couple of years ago in 2-unit maths. Explain. Oh my goodness, I've never been asked that question before. They want me to explain something? One lousy mark. 4% of the candidates got it. 4%, ladies and gentlemen. That is a sad indictment of how little our students understand, because all they do is learn procedures. Tragedy. My favourite maths joke. My number one favourite maths joke. You may have seen it before. Here it comes. Yeah, it's funny, but it's also really sadly true. This is what I spent several years of my career believing, that when you changed it from 8 to 5, okay, she got it wrong, but we kid ourselves that when she gets it right, she actually understands. Dreaming. We are dreaming if we think that. My favourite quote on this topic comes from somebody who I think used to work here but doesn't work here anymore, I think. Our current assessment regime rewards students who can calculate everything, even if they understand nothing. I like that quote. That's it. Perfect. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I'm not sure, Stuart, what sort of tests your students are doing, but we write a lot of tests at our school. We pride ourselves on writing all our tests, and I categorically reject your assertion they do not test understanding. We are very conscious as we write our tests that part of it is memorisation and fluency, and we try and aim perhaps about 50% of our test to evaluate fluency and memory. But the rest of our test is focused on understanding. So I think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater just because, sadly, your daughter hated her tests. There are lots of really, really good tests. I just want to quote some beautiful things we've heard this morning. I can do it in class, but not in the test. To me, that's a wonderful statement. It's not an indictment of the test, it's an indictment of the teaching. Okay? It means a student has developed a false sense of confidence that they understood the material. And in fact, I would argue, and we see this at our school, that one reason students develop a false sense that they have understood the material is because they're working in groups and they're not doing their own thinking. So, yes, well may you. So in fact, the group learning strategy that we teach at our school, we love group learning. But in fact, the key element of our group learning is the first half of your group learning is working on your own, under timed conditions. Because then you know what you can do. Then you get together in a group, and then to talk about some of the other things we heard about, that tests and learning like this should be an opportunity for reflection and for growth. That's the second part. That's the after part of tests. The test itself, however, is an essential instrument to tell you whether the student can actually do it. We've talked about opportunities for growth and about the opportunity to do tests multiple times. There's no reason why you can't do that. At my school, our Year 7s have had a chance to do their assessment tasks multiple times. They get to do it 2 or 3 times. You're stunned because you went to our school a few years ago. Culture has changed. So testing does change and does improve. So I'm going to argue very strongly, if you really want to know if you can do a subject, if you can do a topic, the only way you're going to find out is with a pen and paper test under timed conditions. And it can be a high quality, interesting test that evaluates understanding as much as it evaluates fluency and memorisations. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to focus on the keyword of and, knowledge and understanding. Pen and paper tests would assess knowledge, but not really understanding. And we saw that firsthand this morning when Eddie, if I may quote you, said, "I got away with it and I shouldn't have," when he was referring to him not really understanding what the mathematics was, but was able to fluke it with the procedures alone memorised. With the increased focus on creativity in education now, we need to ensure that we are fostering creative thinkers, not walking mathematical dictionaries. One way of doing this is by marrying mathematics understanding and knowledge with this quote: "Skills associated with creativity, including problem solving, convergent and divergent thinking, collaboration and resilience." That was from a leading educator in creative education. Being overwhelmed is actually a good thing. Because if you remember, every time you were about to learn something new, you were on the brink of crying or feeling overwhelmed. For students to do group work, do exploration, that's when they are put in an uncomfortable zone, and that's when they're about to learn something. An example alternative to pen and paper tests, I'll give you some examples in case the opposition would like to have a look. Open-ended problems. We want students to be able to make choices, and we saw that this morning from Tim's presentation. Collaborative tasks, including that will involve a lot of teacher observation and exploratory tasks. Now, the other keyword is the best way to objectively assess. Students who thrive under our current system with direct instruction, such as those at selective boys' high schools, are good book learners.
That's your second ad hominem attack.
Or selective girls' high schools, are good book learners and test takers. Technology, though, now can evaluate, simplify, solve, differentiate, draw this graph on pen and paper, sit, beg, and roll over much more easily than we can, and more efficiently than we can with pen and paper. These knowledge tests are training students for a world that no longer exists. We want them to become thinkers, not test takers. We need problem solvers and risk takers, not book learners and test takers. That's it. Thank you.
So, we have an opportunity for some questions from the audience before we vote, but I thought in the interests of fairness that I would invite the positive case for a 1 minute response. Should you wish to take it?
Actually, I'd like to respond to the ad hominem attack. So at my school, when I first became head teacher at North Sydney Boys, the classic test was as you described it. It was full of things that the boys had to be able to memorise, regurgitate, and it had a tiny little bit at the end of the test which we called working mathematically, where we did stuff. We've changed with the times. Our tests are now perhaps 20 to 30% of open-ended questions. Most of the exam, when the boys look at it in Year 7, it's 2 blank pages and it has one small thing. We actually take our problems from the AMT problem-solving competitions. They offer extension questions to extend problems, and we use these as the basis. So the boys will actually see 2 blank pages, a very open-ended question. We've trained them and taught them through the term how to cope, so they're not stressed out by this. We have a beautiful little tick box at the top that says, "We guarantee you 1 mark if you even breathe on this question." Yeah? Serious. Yeah, it says actually show some valid working out, but that's how we teach. So again, please change your idea about what a test is. Yeah?
No.
Okay.
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
No.
I just want to ask them a question about chocolate cake.
Well, why don't...
I want to ask them a quick question about chocolate cake. Come on.
Okay, audience questions. Audience questions.
Who came to a tutorial at this university where we use the chocolate cake to get to the bottom of what a radian actually is? Hand up if you remember that tutorial. Okay, look around, look at this. Look around the room, hands up nice and high. Okay, hand up if that kind of felt like the first time you really understood radians.
So what's that got to do with test taking?
Here we are. The products, these are the successes of our current system, and they do not understand the mathematics. They used radians for all sorts of different things for 4 years.
Okay, Stuart, down.
Blaming the test for the illness is like the doctor telling the patient that the reason they're sick is because they took their temperature.
You need a new doctor.
Okay, questions from the audience. Come on, there's got to be some.
Questions.
Surely you've got some questions you'd like to ask. Jonathan.
I don't understand how the word risk takers has much to do with how you assess. How you assess anything. Like it's not. I don't understand how it's assessed. Like I thought it was like more of a personality / resilience thing that isn't necessarily tied to assessment.
Good question.
Could I respond?
Yes.
That's something I think that as young enthusiastic teachers we've got to be very careful about. We are actually not allowed to make assessments on personality traits. We're evaluating their outcomes. What can they do? And this question wasn't that the test is the best way to discover 21st century learners who can collaborate in a future-focused learning environment. The question was how to evaluate mathematical knowledge and understanding. So I take your point.
Can I say something on that? Sure. So the reason why we don't end up fostering characteristics of creative thinkers is because we are working towards pen and paper tests a lot of the time. So
Okay.
we end up not fostering risk-taking at all, for example, in students because there aren't many risks to take in pen and paper tests. They just need to have a dive in, right? I get that.
You can have a
But
guess. That
what
might be a
about-
risk.
Yeah, but what about the kids who fear tests and then we're not objectively assessing them at all? We don't have a good idea of what their knowledge and understanding might be.
Another question from the audience. Sophie.
I noticed that there was a little bit of a concession on Stuart's side around the fact that it isn't actually the assessment that is wrong, it's the teaching. So the chocolate cake example falls into that category of if you teach radians in a particular way, you're teaching for understanding. And then if you can assess with open-ended questions and so on, you're then using their problem-solving skills and their understanding of, yes, sometimes methods, but also just having creative ways of looking at problems.
The university that I attended absolutely insisted that we teach for understanding, and I embraced that throughout my teaching career, and often to my own detriment, because the time I spent trying to get my students to understand the concepts in rich ways, the classroom next door were doing 50 questions from the textbook that were exactly the same as the one that was in the test. So, yes, I agree.
But that just makes, we're all in agreement then.
Yes, it is. But the trouble was the instrument, the pen and paper test.
Okay,
That was the
Norton.
impediment.
And then we'll go to Henry.
I wish I could remember his name. Oh, Rowe it was. Ken Rowe?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
maths researcher who died in the bushfires.
Yes, it was Ken Rowe.
When I was doing the M-Teach here, you showed us a fantastic piece of paper that he did. And he showed, through analysis, that the more you taught for understanding, the higher your students performed in the HSC. And that was astonishing to me. I always thought there was a choice between teaching for understanding and optimising for the HSC. But he did a really comprehensive analysis and showed that teachers who taught for understanding, their students were the ones getting the top marks in the HSC.
Same with NAPLAN. We did a big study over the last couple of years, and the schools that had the greatest growth in NAPLAN were actually teaching for understanding and using the curriculum rather than practicing for NAPLAN tests.
You're supposed to be
So,
impartial.
Henry, sorry?
You're supposed to be
Oh, I'm
impartial.
impartial, that's right. Just delete all that.